Delano Abdoll is my guest, team leader, cross-border taxation expert at Tax Consulting SA. Delano, thank you so much, my brother, for joining us this evening. I really appreciate your time.
Good evening, Aubrey, and thanks so much for having me. I also appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Listen, the minister did speak about this 25% tax incentive for those people who bought solar panels. It appears that it does not include the inverter and the battery in that, I suppose, collection of items that we need to buy for augmenting our electricity supply. Tell us exactly how it works. What are the incentives? What's the rationale behind them? And what do we need to do as consumers tomorrow?
So I think the first thing really to point out is, the minister has announced that individuals who install these rooftop solar panels from 1 March 2023 will be able to claim a rebate of 25% of the cost of the panels. And this is only up to a maximum of 15,000 Rand. So if I just explore that point as you've introduced, this doesn't include, the installation of bolts, batteries. I myself am not an expert in installing solar panels, but it's quite curious, and it might even be an anomaly as to what is the rationale for only limiting the tax incentive to the panel itself. And if I have to expand on where we are at the moment, we're really in a consideration phase, and there's no clear answers. So the best we can do is to try and unpack exactly what we have at this stage. And what that leads me to is really the draft public notice that we've got on returns that need to be submitted by third parties. And there's a few ideas or indicators as to what does it mean practically for individuals to be able to claim this new tax incentive in the form of a rebate. I'm not sure if you have any specific questions we can kind of focus on.
So the way that you build this context up leads me to want to ask a myriad of questions. First of all, we are talking here about a tax rebate for a system that needs a number of things in order for it to work. It needs the solar panels. It needs, I imagine, an inverter. It probably needs a battery, because those are the triumvirate of things required to make the system work. Without the inverter, you can't convert the solar energy into electrical energy that you need. Without the battery, you can't store the inverted or converted solar energy into electricity so that you can use it when there is no sun. So why would the focus only be on the solar panel when the rationale for the whole system needs all of these things, including the bolts, including the installation, which is a cost to the consumer? Why?
Aubrey, at this point, again, it's a consideration phase. The rationale for it only being the panel leaves me and you baffled. And, with this draft public notice that's being released, such as ourselves, Tax Consulting South Africa, we've made submissions and we've given our commentary to kind of focus on these anomalies. And whether or not it will be taken into consideration is something we need to still see. So hopefully there's a better version of what this practically means.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, there's a whole host of things that need to come together to make the incentive and the system work. And one of those things that's also interesting for me really is you need an installer. Why I mention that is because insofar as installing the solar panels concerned, there's a very important reference made in this public notice as to defining a term or an expression which is cited as a solar installation certificate of compliance. So if we thought that the questions are only limited to understanding why only the solar panel, what's the rationale for that? Well, if I quickly read through what solar installation certificate of compliance in its draft format means, it means a certificate of compliance in terms of the electrical installation regulations 2009 issued under Section 43 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act 1993. And the important part for me is in respect of the installation of new and unused solar photovoltaic panels at a residence solely or mainly used for domestic purposes.
Right.
I'm sure you've got questions.
Yeah, I do. By the way, please let me not hoard Delano Abdoll, team leader, cross-border taxation expert at Tax Consulting, as we speak about the tax incentive that government has issued for you to, I suppose, buy into more green production of electricity for your residential area. Give us a call, and we are trying to unpack the various components of this incentive in order for us to be able to understand it. This certificate of compliance, Delano, it seems to be about the installation of a system, not just the solar panels.
Well, it could be. We see a reference to, obviously, the electrical installation regulations. You know, where exactly that comes into play with solar panels, I'm not too sure. We are referred to Occupational Health and Safety Act. So there could be forms of electrical compliance certificates, in other legal forms. But how this interplays with the installation of a solar panel for a tax rebate is still news to all of us.
I'd be interested to hear from those of you who are already perhaps in the process of preparing documentation to be handed over to the South African Revenue Services for this 25% rebate, as to how you understand all of the issues that Delano is bringing out to us. Have you, perhaps in your practice, Delano, had anybody come to you and say, listen, how do I put together these documents in order to be able to have the benefit of this tax incentive?
Personally, Aubrey, the answer is no. But I think more than that, I'm not too sure if the vast majority of the public is aware of what is actually contained in this draft notice and what the practical documents are that might have to come into play for SARS to receive the sufficient information which is required under the Tax Administration Act as it's framed.
Let's take a call from Moshere in Pretoria West. Good evening to you, Moshere.
Yes, Aubrey, guest.
Yep.
Aubrey, on the issue of President announcing the rebate on the issue of solar panels, one would understand, it might be, maybe I might be mistaken, if there is a rebate for the installation, it will be the whole package, because it can't be that someone come and install the panels and issue the certificate and the other person comes and put in the battery and the other stuff. If the house burns, then who will take responsibility?
But you would appreciate, Moshere, that for the purpose of a tax incentive, some sort of a tax rebate, things cannot be left to conjecture, to I think this is what they mean. It has to be as precise as possible, I would imagine. Delano?
Aubrey.
Yes, sorry, Moshere.
Yes, I understand, but for also checking if the person that did the installation, because one will also want to believe that when the government wants someone who is certified, they will want to see if the person is paying tax. I might get someone who will come and install only the panels, and thereafter get someone who is not qualified who will come and install the batteries. How will the government be able to check if the person is complying?
Sure, I hear you. I hear you. So issues around the compliance of the installer and so forth. But Delano, I imagine that this cannot be something that's left to conjecture. In other words, the consumer who then goes to SARS can't say, I think this is what government means. It's got to be very precise, because the incentive is for a precise thing, rather than a general idea, right?
Oh, it could be. I think if we go back to what the draft notice says, there's a specific form that's prescribed for the third parties that's now being included, and this is at point 2.16. A person who issues a solar installation certificate of compliance. So we identify the person that's mentioned, in which this draft notice is referring to, for submitting the third-party return, and it mentions the information which it's concerned. But when you look at the form, Aubrey, what's interesting is it mentions that information will include the following details. And if I just quickly quote, it says income tax reference number or identity number, if no income tax reference number is available, of the person on behalf of whom the installation was done, physical address of installation, cost of the solar photovoltaic panels, and the date on which they were first brought into use. So I think Mashere's question then falls into, well, what is defined insofar as cost is concerned? And does the cost then include these ideas or practical components that put the puzzle together of the installation, fixtures, brackets, fixing? Is it excluded in the cost, or is it excluded in the cost?
Sure.
So real clarity needed on that point.
Yeah. Moodley in Lenasia. Good evening to you, Mr. Moodley.
Good evening, Aubrey, and to your guests as well, eh?
Sure.
I've been following through very closely. I've read possibly every article available on this thing, because I've had an installation done here, the whole caboodle, and
when you say the whole caboodle, you mean solar panels, inverter, and battery?
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Now, the gentleman said he spoke about the 15,000 rand rebate. Am I right?
Yeah. Well, that's what it's kept at. It's 25% of the cost of the solar panels, kept at 15,000 rand.
So, I've got two huge ones here at 5 grand each. So that's two panels. Okay.
Yeah.
And through my reading, I come across this figure of about 160 to 170,000 if you really want to put the real McCoy. So you can, my two panels, they're good, up to a point. They don't do miracles, yeah. We can run the fridges, the Wi-Fi, charge all the tablets, the phones. My wife can get a Netflix, but per panel, 5 grand. So,
and you've got two panels.
I got two, and then
yeah. So we're talking about 10 grand for the panels, for the solar panels here.
Correct.
So you're eligible for what, 1,500 rand as a tax rebate on those two panels.
It's just a waste of time, because now as we stand now, my battery's on 0. With this load shedding stage 6, it's drained the battery out. I checked it before I phoned you. The battery, when it was the so-called normal load shedding, always was at 100% day and night. Okay? Sometimes the night dropped to 97.
Yeah.
But this stage 6 is zapped this battery out completely.
And we are going to probably go back to stage 8 at some point, Moodley. So it's a very scary reality that you are looking at there. Delano, Mr. Moodley's bought 2 panels at $5,000 each, 10,000 rands, I suppose, is the total amount. There are some people that are DIYing this whole thing, who might not have the capabilities nor the qualifications to provide some sort of a compliance certificate. What do we do then?
Again, consideration phase. Even if you buy the real McCoy, does it make sense? Does it make financial sense at the end of the day? But again, we're relying on the current wording that's been provided in the draft public notice. And more than that, we can only hope that the technical nuances that's being submitted as commentary will be taken into consideration, and we will perhaps, hopefully, see a better version of it when it ultimately replaces the current notice in place.
Help me understand what it means, consideration phase. What does that mean?
Well, it's not law at the moment, right?
Yeah.
The draft public notice we have has given us an opportunity to provide comments. And the deadline for those comments to be submitted was the 14th of April. So when I refer to the consideration phase, what I'm really pointing towards is we are now relying on the higher powers to read the material and commentary that's been received and to really test the draft that was published. And out of that, will they concede on certain points? Will they publish the version as is? Or will we see an expansion on certain aspects, such as cost, which might be able to clarify these difficulties in understanding what is the financial rationale in buying 2 real McCoys, and I put 5,000, and at the end of the day, it doesn't cater for the battery, it doesn't cater for the bolts, it doesn't cater for this and that. That's what I mean by the consideration phase.
Sure. Give us a call, 011-883-0702. I tell you, Delano, in my mind, I'm already asking myself the question whether it would, in fact, be worth my while to even go through the hassle of putting together documentation for me to ultimately get a rebate of 1,500 Rand on my 2 panels if I was Mr. Moodley, considering the effort. But please think about that. I want to take a call from Selma in Rudaport. Hi, Selma.
Hello, Audrey.
Yeah, good evening to you, Selma.
I just wanted to say that... Sorry?
Good evening to you. Good evening.
Good evening. Yes, good evening, Aubrey.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've got a lot to say and I don't want to waste your time.
Sure.
Sorry, we have actually, my son is an electrical engineer, so he has done a lot of research into these things. And we then, after the announcement, installed our ones. Now, we were very lucky. We got an inheritance from an overseas auntie, out of the blue. We didn't think we would get it because, well, anyway, that's another story. But so
lucky you, Selma.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, his aunt from overseas. She didn't have any kids. But anyway, long story short, so out of the blue, just before Christmas, he got this inheritance, and it actually paid for the whole installation. And we got 250,000 Rand installation, 250,000.
Yeah.
Now that can see you through.
Yeah.
That can see you through. Although our stove is not attached. You see, what they do is they have to sink it into your system, actually attach it to your plugs and take your plugs off the grid.
Yeah.
Take your lights off the grid.
Sure.
Take whichever appliance you want off the lid. They go into your DV board.
Yeah.
And that is what the COC is for the actual, not just for the panels, but for how it goes into your circuit, because that is where it can, not just the panels that can short circuit and get the house to burn down.
But that is
system.
Isn't that what Delano is actually pointing out, to say that this is a system that must work. It can't just be the solar panels alone. It's an integrated system.
No. Actually, what you have to also do is quite an intricate thing. You have to figure out how much you need per say, your fridges, because depending on the size of your fridge and also how old your fridge is, it depends on how many watts, kilowatts and things, or not kilowatts, but watts you actually use for each little appliance.
Yeah.
So you've got to, my son actually bought 2 little meters, and he plugged them into various items, wrote it down, figured out over how many hours you use it and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
And of course, load shedding screws it up a bit, but anyway. And then after all that, we figured out what we need. Now you get 2 types of batteries. The one that says they are 5 kilowatts, but they only give you 2.5 kilowatt hours.
Yeah.
And then you get the ones that are a bit more expensive that say they're 5 kilowatts and they give you 5 kilowatt hours.
Yeah.
So you have something like that. But you have to make sure what you do.
Let me ask you this.
My son says I've got it the wrong way around, but anyway, never mind. My son says I've got it the wrong way out. But anyway, the question is the one doesn't give you an output. The one doesn't give you the full output of 5 hours.
Right.
So that's what you make sure. What is the output you're going to get out of them? Now you'll get your inverter.
Yeah.
And you get 2 panels. That's the photovoltaic panels that sends it into goes from the panels into the inverter.
Yeah.
Now, unless you get an 8 kilowatt our inverter, an 8 kilowatt inverter, and we've now got 3 5 kilowatt batteries, output batteries.
Yeah.
Then you can go through the night on that mostly. For your plugs and for a normal household, you can go for your plugs and for your lights through the night. We haven't got our stove on it because stoves and things like that draw a lot of power. Vacuum cleaners draw a lot of power. Tumble dryers and washing machines, especially washing machines, to spin the washing machine takes a lot of power. Sometimes even Eskom doesn't supply enough to spin the washing fast enough.
So here's my question for you, Selma. Here's my question for you. Have you put together a group of documents for your tax incentive? And what is in those documents?
The installer supplies it all for you, but you must just make sure he gives you all the pages. The actual certificate of compliance, it has obviously a special number on it. It comes in a special book. They sort of tear it out, whatever. And it gives your information, the identification of the relevant installation, where it is, declaration by the registered person, which is the person obviously who is the registered electrician. He has to be registered electrician with the electricians, whatever board or whatever they call themselves. He gets a registration number. That has to be there. So you can't get anybody to sign it. It says details of the registered person, where even his home address has got to be on there, or his business address.
How long ago did you have this installation in Selma?
A few weeks ago, after the government said one could get a little bit of peanuts back.
Yes. All right.
We should get about, on 10 panels, decent-sized panels, we should get about 8,000 Rand back, which is still not much, but anyway. And as I said,
every little bit helps.
$250,000.
Every little bit helps.
Every bit helps, oh yeah. But you don't have to worry about, it's not a long story to get the stuff together, because what you need for insurance is what you need to claim for.
Sure.
Now, they give you, the people who install it, gives you the COC. They might charge you more for it, or it might be included in your price. It depends. You must ask them. And also an attachment of pages to this. The backside, for the start of they come as a page with 2 sides. See, it's not like you can have 2 pages separately for the COC. And it asks you, like for instance, voltage and distribution board with no load to each phase, voltage, operation of earth leakage test button.
Selma, let me stop you there. Let me stop you there, Selma. I think you've given us a pretty good idea. Delano, Selma seems to have her ducks in a row, but obviously she's one of those people that got the installation done after the announcement by government of this rebate was made. But what of somebody who had an installation done 3-4 years ago, and it was probably some sort of a mixture between a DIY type of installation and some guy knows, but it works. I mean, it's there. It works. Does this mean that this person might not be able to qualify to apply for this rebate?
Well, Aubrey, the rebate, being a new tax incentive, has been prescribed a time period. And that specific time period starts from 1 March 2023. So going back 2-3 years ago already falls outside of the picture. And then further than that, you need to also look at the other requirements that have been stated in this draft notice.
Yeah.
The subtlety of new and unused, So I'm not sure if there's a difference. I don't think there is. Our proposal would probably be to just stick with the word new. But more to that, I don't think we can go back further than 1 March 2023.
So if I did an installation in December 2022, I'm out. I can't claim for this rebate?
Yes, we've been given a prescribed period to start from 1 March 2023.
Yeah.
And going forward from that date.
Sure. Let's take a call from Steve in Boston in the United States of America. Good evening to you, Steve. Hello, Steve.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Aubrey, is that you?
That's right. It's definitely me. Go ahead, Steve.
Sorry, I'm here in Boston down in my lab, and I was doing something very quickly, if I may.
Yeah.
I've done solar stuff for instrumentation and a bit just helping with friends over the last probably 30 years, okay?
Yeah.
And I make very simple comment. Your guest is making very good comments with respect to just, there's a panel cost and a systems cost, et cetera. This has been discussed a lot and well. So my suggestion is this. My friends in South Africa tell me that you have these rolling blackouts which sometimes take 10 or 15 hours a day out of your life. That's not good.
No.
So with respect to, is it a new incentive? Is it an old incentive? Is it compliant? Is it not compliant? All this stuff. And I don't tend to dismiss that. I suggest the following. Basically, you have an inspector. And the government, if the government really wants people to go renewable and go solar, says, tell you what, if you put your stuff in before the incentive, and I'm just suggesting, maybe you get 50% of the incentive, okay, as sort of an amortized cost. If you put it in after the announcement, you get the full amount. But that's not even the point. The point is, instead of the poor homeowner or business owner who doesn't understand the cost details, who frankly can get, as we might say here, hornswoggled, meaning, you 10% is for the panels, but 90% is for the rest of it, which is not usually the case. Put the burden on the installer, and the installer installs. There's a holdback equivalent to the rebate. So instead of the homeowner being saddled with, do I have this? Do I have that? Was this correct? Was that correct? It's on the installer. The inspector shows up and decides whether it either is or is not a good installation, and your guest knows all about this, meaning, what is good and what is not good. And if it isn't good, it's on the installer.
Yeah.
And the homeowner doesn't have a problem. Alternatively, presumably most people will do a good job, and the inspector will say this is good, and the installer will submit the paperwork to prove what was paid, what is owed, et cetera, and he'll get the last of his money from the rebate.
Yeah, I
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate that advice, Steve, and I think it's the kind of advice that would need to be taken up by government. But I think we are still very much at an early stage in South Africa in that we don't even yet, and that's what we're discussing with my guest, we don't even have very clear guidelines as to under which circumstances do we then get to this rebate, right? But
Aubrey, if I may interrupt, with government, it's never going to be clear, and it'll be 10 years from now before it gets cleared up, if it does. And meanwhile, you got rolling blackouts. So that's where the people maybe go to government and say, "Hey, government, help us out, streamline the process."
I hear you. Steve in Boston, USA, thanks very much for your call. Delano, I mean, I hear Steve, but it sounds like a very cumbersome process for a homeowner who has very little understanding of the technicalities and the issues of compliance in terms of the discussion document, this consideration document that's out there at the moment. It almost sounds and feels like there's no real appetite from government to see people actually get this incentive.
Aubrey, that might be the case. But what I really find interesting from the last caller's comment is the reference to homeowner and kind of putting responsibility on the solar installer. That's another anomaly in the draft public notice. Because if you look at the designated information which is being asked to be submitted by a solar installer, it refers to a person on behalf of whom the installation was done. Now, there's a couple of scenarios you could put out there.
So not the installer. In other words, it's the homeowner. Am I correct? In other words, when you say the details or the information required by SARS or government would be the information of the person on behalf of whom the installation is done, not the one who is actually doing the installation.
So, if I understand you correctly, I think the reference I'm making is that information needs to be provided by the installer.
Yes.
Right? For the installation.
Yes.
And certain information then needs to be provided to SARS.
Yes.
In the form of a third-party return. But when you look at the designated information in its current draft format, it references information needed, such as an identity number, the income tax reference number, but then it goes on to say of the person on behalf of whom the installation was done. It doesn't necessarily refer to the homeowner. Is it the person who called the installer on that day? Is it the person who owns the property? Is it the person who pays for the installation?
It could be
those are the anomalies we are still stuck with.
So what you're saying to me is that it could be the tenant, and not the owner, Delano Abdoll. Let's see if we can't get a hold of Delano Abdoll back again. While we do so, let's take a quick break. But yeah, some unfortunate and glaring anomalies here that must be ironed out in order for us to be able to understand how we access this tax incentive. Delano Abdoll is my guest, team leader, cross-border taxation expert at Tax Consulting SA. Some very, very important points that he's bringing through at the moment.
The No 2. Let's walk the talk.
Streaming countrywide on the 702 app.
Delano Abdoll is my guest, team leader, cross-border taxation expert at Tax Consulting SA. We're talking about the tax incentive that government has dangled before you and I to be able to really incentivize us to buy those solar panels. But there are all sorts of anomalies at the moment that we are discussing that make it a little difficult to understand exactly what the parameters, what the requirements exactly are in order for us to access that particular tax rebate. And Delano, you were still talking about the fact that it does not necessarily mean the owner is the person on whose behalf the installation is being done. It could be a tenant, and that is another anomaly. Explain to me why that would be an issue.
Well, it's an issue because it's not clear.
Yeah.
So when you leave something in law up for interpretation and the parameters don't make it clear, especially when we are referring to requirements, what falls part of the box and what falls outside, you need to have those parameters in place. Otherwise, well, if it's not clear, how do I comply?
Yeah.
And if we're looking towards compliance to try and make the incentive work for everyone and to tick all the boxes, surely we need to know exactly what is required from us, and that ultimately needs to lead to the end result of the tax rebate.
What is the time frame for the submission of the documents, and by when does one get the rebate if one is successful?
So insofar as the time frames are concerned, we're looking at the 2024 tax year of assessment. So the incentive from 1 March 2023 running all the way up until the 29th of February 2024. And provision has been made in this draft public notice as to when exactly a submission needs to be made. And in its current format, it references that submissions need to be made by the 31st of May 2024.
Are you seeing a lot of people making those submissions at this stage? I know it hasn't happened directly to you as a practice, but are you seeing people complying and putting together the documentation, except maybe for Selma, who's got everything sorted out? But I mean, is this going to happen?
Aubrey, again, consideration phase.
I hear you. Give us a call, 011-883-0702. Delano Abdoll is my guest. We're talking about this tax rebate of 25%, at least at this stage, of the new unused solar panels. Are we a bit pedantic here, Delano? I mean, could it be that it's just a cut and paste sort of mistake by a junior person who was putting together these requirements, but really the issue is quite clear that it's going to require everything as explained to us by Selma?
Aubrey, I think if I deviate a bit from the point, I know that in our legal fraternity and in South Africa, we're always proud of our constitution as an example of good legislation. So if we pride ourselves on that standard, surely it should apply to all forms of legislation.
Surely. Let me speak to Raymond in Centurion. Hi, Raymond.
Good evening to you, Aubrey, and your guests.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
As usual, it is not a well thought out plan. It is very flimsy. As a gentleman said, the parameters that the citizens can operate under is not clearly defined. I, for one, would think when it comes next year, the cutoff date, they're going to extend it. That's what I think will happen, because that's what they normally do. But as far as the parameters are concerned, I think it's got a lot of holes in it. It is like the Constitution in 1994. I said it then, and I'll still say it now. there is a lot of holes in it. That's my opinion.
Raymond in Centurion, and I think at this stage I would agree with Raymond, and I suppose as Delano has been saying that we are still very much in the consideration phase, and there is still a requirement for you and I to submit, I suppose, commentary on this whole regime, I suppose to assist government in this whole process. Is that how we should understand this consideration phase, do you think, Delano?
That is exactly how we should consider it, but just on a point of correction, the due date for submission of commentary has unfortunately passed.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course.
But I am very confident that there are many who have made very good submissions and very good commentary to take the conversation forward.
What is the appetite, I mean in real terms, of SARS, the Department of Finance and Treasury, for amending, changing whatever needs to be changed so that it is commensurate with the requirement of making sure that documents are as clear as possible, such that we understand what they require from us so that we have proper compliance? How much of the submissions from people such as yourself and others are usually accepted by government and in order to make the changes that are required?
At this stage, it's difficult to say whether the appetite exists, but what one can perhaps unfold in the future is that if there is a lack of appetite, there might be an opposing appetite to eventually challenge the law in the courts. And at that stage, one could point towards the commentary and considerations that were tabled, and that could be a factor taken into consideration when challenging that legislation when it is in fact law.
Some questions coming from our WhatsApp line. The number there is 072 702 702. No, 072 702 1702. Here's a question that comes through to you, Delano. The tax incentive is just to build a database of all users so as to tax them later for having solar. And that's from Leslie. Would that be true?
What I would say to that comment is that the system is becoming smarter.
Sure. And then somebody says, "Hi, Aubrey. Am I to understand, I think, that the tax incentive is limited to a purchase of solar panels to the value of 15K? No, Colin. 15K is the cap at which you would receive a rebate. So, am I responding correctly there, Delano?
Yes, you are, Aubrey.
And then somebody says, I can't believe how the citizen became part of Eskom problems. The citizen now is looking for solutions for the mess the government caused. The citizen must cough up his savings or put himself in debt to abide by the new uncertain proposed solution the government came up with. The ANC is sitting back and watching us. So instead of fighting to bring Eskom back to do its work, we're helping them to put us more in crisis, all sorts of crises from a son. And then somebody asks, why not use the incentive to fix Eskom? I suppose all of these are questions that reflect people's irritation with the whole situation. Tomorrow, I'm making an example now, Delano. I've bought a system. I've got panels that I've had installed, but they were installed by my friend who's an electrician, but who isn't really a qualified installer in terms of, I suppose, regulation. What do I do? Do I forget about it? What do I do? And I installed this last year, March.
So that's a bit of a gray area, and I am not too sure if it's another weakness in the time period that's being fixed to this incentive. And more than that, relying on the public to to kind of have knowledge when we are still in a consideration phase on which installers are accredited and, what would the requirements be from a SARS perspective of who needs to be installing these solar panels.
So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. We have a pretty good relationship with SARS, and they tend to heed our call when we invite them. I'm going to invite them, Delano, to explain some of these anomalies to us. Would you be able or available to help us ask the questions, perhaps, of SARS so that our listeners can have a better understanding of the lay of the land as far as this issue is concerned?
I most certainly would, and I would also be grateful for the opportunity.
Delano Abdoll, thank you so much. How do people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about this regime?
Well, Aubrey, we've got a solar panels and tax South Africa group that's been created by Tax Consulting South Africa, both on LinkedIn and Facebook. We've included all material up to date in this consideration phase. And really, we're at a point where we want to share the information and engage with people. So I'd encourage them to please join those groups and we can take the conversation forward.
So what I'll do, Delano, and this is a commitment I'm making, I will reach out to the folks at SARS and once again come back to you, and perhaps we could make a real learning process out of this discussion. I think South Africa needs it, and I want to thank you so much for being available this evening to come and discuss it with us.
Thank you so much, Aubrey, and thank you to your listeners who also called in. Much appreciated, and have a great evening.
Delano Abdoll, team leader, cross-border taxation expert at Tax Consulting. Much appreciated.